So, welcome to week two from Atheist to Christian. Tonight we'll be answering a question, actually tonight and next week, answering the question of, does God exist? Right? Does a creator of this universe, everything that we see, exist? And how do we know? And what can we look to understand that? And so before we get going into that content, I do want to just clarify a little bit about apologetics, because I skipped over that a little bit last week and didn't do as good of a job as I could. But the word apologetics, from the Greek word that I will butcher in its pronunciation, but apologia, all right, which is to give a defense. Right, we're not apologizing for anything. God doesn't need us to apologize for Him at all. But it's and so it does get confused. But it's from being ready to give a defense, and so it's an explanation, right? And we do have to understand where apologetics falls in terms of evangelism and discipleship as well, right? We talked last week about how it can build our faith to better understand the things of God, and that can be helpful in discipleship. It's also important for us to know that apologetics helps lower some of the barriers, right? Answer some of the intellectual questions people have about Christianity. But apologetics is not going to save anyone. It is only through the gospel that anyone is saved. It is only through a transformation that the Holy Spirit does, like we looked at on Sunday, that someone is saved. And so apologetics has its place. All right, both in our faith and in our ability to answer questions and concerns people have, and these days with social media, the YouTube videos they've watched, and be able to answer some of those things. But it does not save anybody, and so we need to understand that. We need to be careful to not get into an argument. You know, our goal in evangelism or apologetics should never be to win an argument, right? If it becomes an argument to begin with, that likely means that emotion has gotten into it, and we're already losing our purpose a little bit. Because as soon as emotion gets involved, people get defensive, they put up walls, and people are really no longer listening to anyone, like on social media, when people are just making their points or parroting what they've seen talking heads say, instead of actually having a discussion. And so apologetics can be very useful. The things we're talking about tonight can be very useful in answering sincere questions and laying out logical arguments for the existence of God. But we have to be careful where we put it, and not be just trying to win an argument with somebody. Because we don't have to work too hard to find an argument. That'll find you on any street corner. But we are going to be digging into, does God exist, and utilizing some scientific observation and logic in making two logic arguments, right? And they're called the cosmological argument and the teleological argument. That's what we're going to be diving into today. But first of all, we are looking at the evidence from the universe. And so Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." Right? The very universe itself, as we saw in Romans 1 last week, displays knowledge of God, the existence of God. And so we are going to be talking about the universe. Next week, we're going to dig in more on earth. This is more beyond earth. Next week is more on earth in terms of the four arguments for God we look at. And so the first one is the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument, and this is what it looks like, and I'll put this up again as we bounce around a little bit. But basically, there's two premises that it's based off of, and if those two things are true, then logic dictates the third statement, right? That everything had a beginning, had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Right, and so they build there. And so what you'll notice about this argument and the next one is that nobody really argues with the first point. Okay? That's called the law of causality. And very few people are going to argue with that first point, that everything that had a beginning had a cause. Because we know that if we see anything in existence, especially anything that makes sense to us, it had a cause, right? Something doesn't come from nothing. Something is created. And so everything that had a beginning had a cause. It's a fundamental understanding of science called the law of causality. It's the second point is where the issue is, or where the debate is. that the universe had a beginning. That's not always been the belief. For a long time, a lot of people believed, very much fewer today, but for a long time, a lot of people believed that the universe had existed forever. Right? We look around and this must have always been here. And yet scientists have had to agree over time that the universe had a beginning because the evidence continues to mount. The evidence continues to add up to a very clear understanding of the fact that the universe had a beginning. And the book goes into quite a bit of depth for it, but we're going to look at 4 points today in terms of the universe having a beginning. But essentially, there's only 2 possibilities for anything that exists. There's only 2. Either it's always been there, or it had a beginning, right? Those are the only 2 possibilities. And so for the universe, either it's always been there, or at some point, it began to exist, right? That's just logical. And so to make the argument that the universe had a beginning, we look at certain things, all right? And these are the 4 that we're going to look at today. And these come from science and philosophy, all right? The first one is from philosophy. The infinite past impossibility. It's impossible to have today based on an infinite past. Okay, now it's a deep concept, but I think it's understandable by anybody. So I don't know how long it took you to get across a bridge today. Many of you probably drove across one of the bridges today. But that, the midpoint bridge, right? Does anybody know how many miles long it is? Is it about 3 miles? Okay, I'll take your word for it, right? So it's about 3 miles long, right? So it's going to take you a certain amount of time to get across that bridge as long as you're making progress forward, right? Depending on how the traffic is, it might be a short amount of time, it might be a long amount of time, right? But at some point, you're going to get all the way across it, and at some point, you're going to get halfway across it. But try to imagine as if that bridge's starting point was infinitely in the other direction. How long and when would you reach even the middle of it? You can't. Because no matter what starting point comes to mind for how long you think that bridge is, if it's an infinitely that way bridge in terms of your starting point, you never actually get going. And so you say, it would take a year. Well, no, you have to go back a step further and a step further and a step further because it's infinitely into the past. The idea of an infinite past is impossible in terms of time. To get to today from an infinite past, you can't do it. At some point, it had to start, right? At some point, there has to be a beginning, right? So it's a philosophical argument for why we know that time had a beginning, because otherwise we never get to today. Now, that's different than saying that God hasn't existed eternally, because what we understand from Scripture is that the eternally existing God created, right? He started it. Right? And so that's when things change. That's how we know that the entity that created the universe is a personal entity, because a personal entity is one that can change the status quo versus an impersonal force, more like the commonly held understanding of the force from Star Wars, right? Where it's just a force that's in and through everything. It takes a personal force to actually act and create and change something. And so it's not an argument that nothing could have existed for eternity past or for infinite past. It's about time itself. Time had to have a beginning, all right? Second law of thermodynamics. I don't know if you all have ever heard of that before, but the second law, you probably, maybe it's not since high school. The second law talks about how the universe is running out of usable energy, right? That over time, more and more energy is being turned into heat, and the usable amount of energy is declining. Well, you have a similar problem with an infinite past to the universe as you do the time issue when it comes to the energy issue. If the second law of thermodynamics is accurate, then at some point you would have to have a beginning of that usage of energy. Otherwise, we would have already long ran out somehow in the eternity past. Third one is the expansion of the universe. The expansion of the universe. This concept as a whole just fascinates me, first of all. Even beyond what we're talking about here. Like, what is the universe expanding into? Because from science, scientists would argue that the universe is expanding, right? The measurements and the argument for it, right? We're going off of that scientific understanding. But the idea is that space itself is expanding. I don't even like what it's expanding into. I don't even know how to even conceive of that. But the idea of a expanding universe, unless you're going to go the route of it expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting and going the accordion argument with it, which again has other issues like the second law of thermodynamics, then the expanding universe argument from a single point leads to an understanding of the fact that the universe had a beginning. Because remember, we're making an argument for the universe having a beginning. We're looking at evidence that leads us to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning. And the size of the galaxy, this is in the book on page 109 for those of y'all that have the book with you. 200 billion stars in our galaxy, which is equal to all the grains of sand on all the beaches. And yet, if you're traveling 17,000 miles per hour, or 5 miles per second, it would take you 200,000 years to travel between the two closest grains of sand. That's how big our universe is. That's how immense our universe is. And I think we're supposed to grow in our awe of God as we study and learn those things through science. Right? Why is the universe so big? I don't know. Right? Maybe it needs to be for what God has laid it out to accomplish. We don't know. Nobody knows. But the reality is, it's huge. It baffles our minds even to think about how big the universe is. And as a Christian, that describes how big God is to us in an extent. And he's expanding it even from there. The last one is the Big Bang. All right, now hold on. I know as soon as I say the words the Big Bang, someone's like, that's not true. Because the Big Bang argument is normally associated with a something from nothing argument, right? Put forth as a naturalistic explanation for the universe. Well, just think about it for a second. It may make sense in a conversation with somebody to grant them the Big Bang theory in an argument to understand the universe has a beginning. And then we can talk about something coming from nothing. And scientists try to go down all kinds of routes of trying to explain the universe beginning through just a naturalistic perspective. But the Big Bang theory, the idea that there at one point began the universe, almost like someone spoke it into existence. And then it expanded from there. The understanding of that can help us in helping someone understand where this universe has come from and the fact that it had a beginning. Now, we're not talking about it going back to, nothing existing. But the universe beginning to exist includes all of what that something is. And so to go back to our argument here, the book lays out how the radiation from the Big Bang, some of those things that they see, and some other details, if you want to read further on what some of those scientific understandings are that lead us to premise 2 being true. The universe had a beginning. Therefore, the universe had a cause. Now, many scientists are coming to agree with all of this. There's a lot of scientists, including Stephen Hawking, who would not exactly disagree with this logic argument. The question becomes, what was the cause? Raise your hand if you know what string theory is. I was just curious if we had anybody. Raise your hand if you've heard about string theory. Okay, more people have heard of it. Okay, good. Right, string theory is one of those attempts to explain the beginning with nothing before that. It's an attempt to explain it with a naturalistic explanation. You see, there is a term called philosophical naturalism. It's the idea that no matter what, the answer isn't supernatural or God. Regardless of what we see, we have to understand and know God's not the answer. We've got to find another one. Right? We've got to keep looking for something else. Stephen Hawking went to his grave still trying to prove string theory. still trying to explain what he came to term, I think he was the one that came up with the term, the TOE, the theory of everything. Because he understood that the universe had a beginning, everything that has a beginning had a cause, and he needs to be able to explain what that cause is apart from God to justify his atheism. And so string theory is one of those attempts. The multiverse is another one of those attempts. I don't know if we have any Marvel fans or not, but the multiverse has been made popular through Marvel recently. The idea that there's multiple, in fact, maybe even infinite universes that are out there and available to us. And that argument will come in our next argument as well to try to explain the design that is perceived. But the idea that there's either string theory or multiverse or something else so that just by natural happenings, just by chance, everything exists. It's the argument to explain it all without God as the answer. You know how much, we just went through, evidence, and we could have gone through it for hours, the evidence of the universe having in the beginning. You know how much evidence there is for string theory or for the multiverse? 0. It's a theory. It's an interesting one, to be honest. You can watch some videos on it. It's a very interesting theory that's based on no evidence whatsoever. It's based on we've got to come up with something. We've got to figure something out, right? And it can't be God. Maybe it was a computer, right? Maybe a computer came up with it all. Well, that's actually an argument that was used in a debate from a guy against William Lane Craig. And I've got that video clip to show you their exchange about it. So take a look. Hopefully we got audio running back there.
But the cause hasn't got to be God. Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless,
Can you turn it up?
Spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I'll go back and start it over. Here. You ready?
But the cause hasn't got to be God. Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't... computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it timeless? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function. It takes
time. No, this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent?
Yes, you have to be logically coherent.
Oh, no, this computer is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
And a computer is a physical
Not this computer.
Object.
Oh,
well, then,
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical,
feedback. So yeah, we got to, if we can just call it something else, right? But it still has to have those properties to be the originator of the universe. And so here's the next one. But before we move on to that one, why is he talking about spaceless, timeless, and immaterial for this cause of the universe that this computer would have to be? Well, it's because the entity that created the universe would have to be outside and beyond what it created, otherwise it didn't create it. And so if all matter was created at the Big Bang or whatever it is you want to call it when it was spoken into existence, then the cause has to be immaterial. If time was created and started at that moment, then it has to be timeless. And if it was, what's the other one? And if space was created, right, it can't be bound by space. And so immaterial and not bound by space, not bound by time. The cause has to be outside and beyond those things. Therefore, this computer has to be essentially the same thing as God, right? So that's the cosmological argument. And I'll open up to questions at the end and stuff, but we're going to go look at the second one too. The teleological argument off of the word telos, or telos, that means design. All right, it's the fine-tuning argument, some people would refer to it as. It's the argument from the design of the universe. We're going to look at a similar argument that's more earthbound next week, but this one is the design of the universe. And listen, you can make this argument to atheists online, in person, whatever it is, and they're going to balk at the argument. It could have just happened that way, right? Christopher Hitchens was a well-known arguably anti-theist, even more so than atheist. And he was one of the four horsemen that was trying to take down theism back in the, 90s and early 2000s was probably their heyday. And they were debating all kinds of guys like John Lennox and others. And they were trying to break it down. But Christopher Hitchens, in one of his more candid moments, admitted that this argument is the one that gives him the most heartache. That this is the argument that gave him the most difficulty to come to terms with, this argument from design. And we'll look at some quotes from some atheists in a little bit that'll go to that same point of the idea that this is a very difficult thing to just walk away from and hold to an atheism above a theism. All right, but first, I'm going to hand it off to my good friend, Sean McDowell, to kind of give you an idea for it.
Let's start in the world of physics. And imagine you come visit me, live in San Juan Capistrano, and there's some undeveloped land near where I live. And we go walking in the hills kind of behind where I live, and you see this abandoned cabin. You think, you know what, let's walk up and explore. So you walk up closer, you notice something strange. You hear the sound of your favorite song in the background. Beat It by Michael Jackson. You think, well, I'll explore anyways. You walk in, you smell the scent of your most beloved meal. But then as you get closer, the door's open. You look down and you see shoes that are your size, a jacket that fits you perfectly. All the books you read are on the counter. You open the fridge, it's all the snacks you like. You walk over, there's a tiny bathroom. It's the exact toiletries you use. Now, besides suspecting you're in a horror movie, what would you think? You think somebody has prepared this in advance. There's too many things set just right for my liking and my taste. This couldn't be chance. Well, interestingly, just in the past few decades, scientists have begun to realize that the parameters in both physics and cosmology in our universe are like this cabin. They're exquisitely organized within a small range to allow the emergence and sustenance of life. So Freeman Dyson, a well-accomplished physicist, says, as we look out in the universe and identify the many accidents of physics and astronomy that have worked to our benefit, it almost seems as if the universe must, in some sense, have known that we were coming. You see what it means? There's laws of physics and cosmology that scientists say exist like on a razor's edge. And if the laws were changed the slightest to the left or the right, the entire universe would be inhospitable to life. So it's almost like Goldilocks' porridge. That's too hot, that's too cold, just right. We seem to live in a universe that's just right for the emergence and sustenance of life. In fact, many would say it looks like a put-up job. In fact, Frederick Hoyle, an agnostic astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, he said it almost seems as if somebody's monkeying with the laws of physics.
It does indeed seem like someone's monkeying with the laws of physics. So he's talking about this argument right here, the teleological argument, the argument for design or from design. And every design has a designer. For the most part, we wouldn't argue with that. You see something that has some design to it, and you know there was a mind involved in that. There was something that put that together. And so every design has a designer. Well, we come to the second premise again, the second part of this argument, that our universe has incredibly complex design. And he was touching on that a little bit in that video. There's actually 122 what are called constants. 122 anthropic constants, right? And these are some of those letters you've seen in formulas in physics back in the day, back when you were in high school or in college. Some of those things like the like gravity, so the gravity constant, the expansion rate of the universe, the carbon dioxide level on Earth. There's all these constants that are used in our formulas, but are also so closely honed in and tuned in that you begin to see that there's just no way it could have happened by any other means. Can you turn it down just a little bit? Yeah. So our universe has incredibly complex design. And you see some of these up here. I don't even know what half these things are. But what I know is that you can't move them or change them, otherwise life goes away, right? The life goes away. If the carbon dioxide level in our atmosphere was changed by any significant amount, even a small amount, life struggles to survive. The plants don't have enough of it, or we have too much of it, and we have problems. The gravity constant, you can't change it by more than 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. Otherwise, we have significant issues with gravity. For the expansion rate of the universe, you change about 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. We have significant issues with the expansion of the universe and the universe being able to sustain life. The arguments being made for chance and it just happens, or the multiverse. There's just enough universes exist that one of them has to give life. No, the reality that we see from this argument right here is that the universe is so highly complex and it's designed so finely tuned to provide life that if you're playing the averages, it's actually more likely that life doesn't exist than that it does exist. Oh, there's all these planets in the solar system. There has to be aliens on some other planet because we exist here too. Well, no, the earth is so finely tuned as well so that we can have life on this earth that it actually makes it's a higher chance that we would not be alive than that we are alive. And so this design leads us to this understanding. Every design has a designer. Our universe has incredibly complex design. Therefore, our universe has a designer. But again, philosophical naturalism, right? There's got to be some other answer. Here's a couple other quotes in addition to the ones that Sean McDowell shared. Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Right? This is from Francis Crick, who is not a Christian, but he understands from co-discovering DNA, which has all of its encoding and design in it. He understands that we have to act as if this has not been designed. Richard Dawkins, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. One of the guys argues with theists and argues for atheism. We're going to look more at humanity in the future. But I forgot. I have another video to help you understand these constants as well. This one does a pretty good job of visualizing it for us. So take a look at this one. This one's from William Lane Craig's ministry.
From galaxies and stars down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon?
That's what it comes down to, right? What is the best explanation for what we see? Right, the idea of the premise of the book of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I look at all of this evidence. I look at all that is out there and all the logical arguments and the history of it and everything. And what is the most logical, best explanation of the evidence? There's really, as it pertains to this argument, there's only 3 options. Right? You can make an argument that it had to be this way. Right? I don't understand why it just had to be this way. The universe had to be designed, not designed, that would be the third argument. The universe just had to have all of these things in the way that it is, and that's just how it is, right? It's not exactly based on much evidence at all. It's based on faith. The second option would be chance, and that's the one you probably hear the most often. Given enough chances, it's going to happen, right? The chances of another planet supporting life, right? Because you do have to make the argument that Earth is not unique, right? If we're going off of natural chance and natural processes, then you do have to support the idea that there's another planet out there somewhere that supports life. Otherwise, we're special. Can't have that. Can't have that at all. That sounds too much like there's a God in a Bible or something, right? We can't be unique and special like that. It has to be naturally happening through chance. So there's so many planets out there. You've heard that argument before. There's so many planets. At least one of them has to have life. Well, here's the numbers to it, right? There are 10 to the 22 power of planets. That means 10 with 22 zeros. It's a lot of planets, right? I mean, that's a pretty high number. And so you can make an argument, well, there's just that many planets out there. Something has to work. Well, it's actually 1 in 10 to the 138th power chance. In other words, 138 zeros, that you would find another planet like Earth designed and tuned in such a way that there would be life, that all the things would be equal. It's not just water. That's what you hear about in the news, right? Found a planet with water. There might be life. I mean, water is necessary for life, but you need a whole lot of other things as well to have life. Not just liquid, right? Not just water. But it's been dumbed down and simplified so much in hopefulness that if we find a planet with water, with a similar temperature, then we're going to find life. But here's the thing. That chance, that 1 in 10 to the 138th power, which means 138 zeros, there's only 10 to the 70th power. 10 with a 70 zeros. Total atoms in the universe. And so it takes that chance and puts it in a totally different context. Yes, there's a lot of planets out there, but it's so unlikely, based on chance alone, that we would find a planet, including Earth, being able to sustain life like it does. It's so unlikely that we should not be expecting and we should not be hoping for it. Now, I'm getting off, this is a tangent, but do we believe in extraterrestrials as Christians, though? Right? I mean, what about like UFOs, all those unidentified flying things, right? Those are, I always think that's funny because it's unidentified for a reason.
Chad, it's unidentified flying objects.
That's right, unidentified flying objects, which means we don't know what they are, right? You know what my short answer is? Of course we believe in extraterrestrial beings. They're called angels. and demons. We do believe in other beings that aren't like us. We believe in a spiritual world. And so no, not little green men from a different planet, right? Having life due to the natural working of nature. But we do obviously believe in there's other beings. But they make this argument for chance being that explanation, because you have to give it an explanation. You have to try to explain the design because we see it all around us. And it all points to a designer, almost as if we're all without excuse, like Romans 1 says. We're all without excuse. We can look and see his glory. We can see his existence written in nature all around us. And they have to try to decide or to argue it away. So the third option is design, right? That it was done on purpose by an intelligent mind that we call God, and designed it. So which makes the most sense? Well, obviously we're here because we think it's design, or at least many of us in the room. But the necessity and the chance actually make even less sense than you might have thought they did. Let's look at Scripture before we finish here. John chapter 1. Obviously, this is one that we've looked at not that long ago. But in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You can approach this in two angles, right? You can look at the observational evidence, right? That general revelation we talked about last week. And we can follow it to God. But we can also take the Scripture that we have and compare it with what we're observing and what we see out and around us, and it still lines up. Right? It lines up. We see the evidence for a beginning. We see the evidence for the creation of time itself. We see the evidence of a creator. And so these arguments do not get you to Jesus as Messiah. Right? We're building it as we go along. Right, we talk about what is truth, the fact that there is absolute truth. There is objective, absolute truth that we can actually discover and believe. Now we look at some of those truths that we see from nature, from science, from philosophy, for the cosmological argument that the universe had a beginning and therefore must have a cause. We look at the design of it. It's not just random chaos. It's highly complex design. Therefore, it has a designer. Next week, Mr. Mabry, Caleb Mabry, is going to be leading us through the next two arguments while I'm in Hungary. And I'll be eager to join y'all again the following Wednesday. But we'll look at two more arguments for there being a God, a creator. And then we'll start walking the rest of the journey, right? We're going to walk through, okay, well, if there is a God, then what do we look for? Right? We look for the fact that if there is a supernatural God that created everything, then miracles are possible. And what do we do with the miracles that we have seen or have recorded? And who is the God that spoke to us? And what book is he speaking through? All those details, you work your way down into Jesus Christ as Messiah and Lord. Again, still, the gospel is what saves. And not everybody needs to see these arguments to come to faith in Christ. Many people already understand there is a God. They already understand there's a creator. But we can understand it even better just how clearly laid out in nature it is that God displays his existence. And it should put us in awe of him. Right? It should build our faith. It should lead us to live for him even more courageously, I think, and more confidently. And so those are the arguments for tonight. The cosmological argument, the teleological argument. There'll be two more next week, and then we'll continue through this logic train, essentially, that will bring us ultimately to Jesus as Messiah.